Christmas Bride, a short story. Sapphire Bay Romance, Book 2. Written by Sandra Edwards. Narrated by Heather Masters. Chapter 1. The McClure family Thanksgiving dinner table was especially quiet this year. Cammie McClure's older sister, Diane, and her husband lived in Italy. Diane's husband was in the Navy. And since Diane was 7 months pregnant, there was no holiday trip home for them this year. Cammie's little brother, Miles, was away at college and doing his own thing. This Thanksgiving, it was just Cammie and her parents, Jason and Paula McClure, and they were uncharacteristically quiet. Her father stabbed a couple of slices of turkey off the platter and handed the dish to Cammie. She took it, chose a small piece, then passed it to her mother. "How's Jeannie doing?" Paula McClure asked. "Is she enjoying Hawaii?" "She loves it," Cammie shrugged. "But who wouldn't? It's paradise." When Cammie had gone there for Jeannie's wedding, she'd been awed by the beauty and the climate. She wouldn't mind going back for a visit, but airline tickets weren't cheap. "Sounds like you miss her," Paula said. Cammie nodded. Her mother waited a few seconds before adding, "Why don't you go see her?" "Believe me, I'd love to." Cammie rolled her eyes and added under her breath, "If I could afford it." As a therapist, Cammie lived comfortably enough, but there wasn't a lot of room for luxuries in her budget.
"Your mother and I were thinking it might be a good idea for you to go see her over the Christmas holiday,"
Jason said. Cammie shook her head. "Dad, I can't afford that." Jason looked at Paula and nodded. As her mother got up and began fiddling in the hutch behind the table, Cammie's dad looked at her again.
"It's all taken care of. Since your mother and I won't be here for Christmas, we wanted to make sure that you weren't alone."
"You won't be here?" Cammie asked. "Where are you going?"
"We're taking a cruise," he said. "Alaska."
Cammie stared at her father. They were going on a cruise? At Christmas? Paula placed an envelope beside Cammie's plate. Jason said,
"This is your Christmas present. Round-trip airfare and cash to get you through the week."
Her mother spoke up. "You're flying out on the 23rd and returning January 2nd. Cammie didn't say anything. She just kept staring. "Aren't you excited, dear?" Paula asked, reclaiming her seat. "We know how much you miss Jeannie, and you raved about Hawaii. We thought this was the perfect solution." "I know. I can hardly believe it myself," Cammie said into the phone. She'd called Jeannie after she got home that evening. "Are you sure you can find a room for me?" She imagined the hotel was booked solid for the holidays. "Most definitely," Jeannie said. "Donnie's cousin is getting married Christmas Eve, so we've left a few rooms vacant for family members who decide to attend at the last minute." "Cool," Cammie said. "Well, I guess I'm headed to Hawaii for the holidays." "I'm so excited," Jeannie said. "I can't wait to see you. We're going to have so much fun, just like old times." Cammie was looking forward to seeing Jeannie and visiting the island paradise again, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was going to end up being a third wheel. Chapter 2. December 23rd. Cammie McClure shoved her carry-on bag into the overhead bin and claimed seat 4B by the window. She was a little surprised at ending up in first class. That hadn't been noted on any of her paperwork until she'd printed out her boarding pass. Cammie wondered if her parents had actually forked out the cash for the upgrade, or if Jeannie had a little something to do with it. However it happened, Cammy was grateful to her benefactor. The flight to Honolulu was roughly 5 hours, and she was thankful to have the upgraded seat and leg room. Cammy fastened her safety belt and glanced up, wondering who would be sitting beside her on the long flight. Whoever it turned out to be, she hoped they didn't talk too much. Leaving her shades on, she stealthily checked out the remaining first-class passengers as they boarded the plane. A young couple came in. She could tell they were a couple because the girl was hanging on the guy's arm. As they took their seats across the aisle from Cammy, he put their bags in the overhead bin, then winked at Cammy before he claimed the aisle seat. Jerk, Cammy thought. And he was probably on his honeymoon. Good men these days were few, far, and in between. She looked back toward the airplane's entryway, and the most handsome man she'd ever seen came across the threshold. His lean, muscular physique was impressive in a pair of Levi's and a black t-shirt. Usually, Cammy liked her men not quite so casually dressed. But considering the rippled chest and well-defined biceps beneath the t-shirt, she was quickly changing her mind. Finally, her gaze settled on his face. His chiseled good looks were offset by dark hair that nearly touched his collar and the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. Mr. Incredibly Gorgeous looked at Cammy and smiled. She felt her knees go weak, even though she was sitting. He shoved his bag into the overhead bin above her and claimed the vacant seat beside her. Cammy's heart fluttered. She looked at his hand, the left one. No ring. Not even the sign of a ring having ever been on his ring finger. Merry Christmas to me. As he fastened his safety belt, he looked at Cammy.
Heading to Oahu for Christmas, huh?
He smiled. Yeah, she nodded. I'm going to see a friend for the holidays.
Boyfriend?
He asked, looking a little dismayed. She felt the heat burning her cheeks. No. She looked shyly away. He asked, Waikiki? Cammy shook her head and looked back at him. North Shore.
Yeah?
He asked.
Me too.
He offered Cammy his hand. She shook it.
Cody Hollis,
he said. Cammy McClure. The stewardess came by. Can I get you something to drink? Water or a soft drink, perhaps? Sprite, Cammy said.
Coke,
Cody replied. The stewardess moved on. Cody looked back at Cammy and asked,
So, what is it that you do?
Cammy sucked in a breath. He was either going to accept her profession or laugh about it. She said, I'm a therapist. Cody nodded.
My brother keeps telling me I need therapy.
He laughed.
Where do you practice?
Cammy chuckled, thankful that he hadn't laughed at her. California, she said. North of San Francisco. He frowned.
That's a long way to go.
Yeah? She asked. Where do you hail from?
Texas,
he said.
Outside Dallas.
Dallas? Figures that Mr. Incredibly Gorgeous would live halfway across the country. Cammy shrugged. Yeah, that is a long way. The stewardess returned with 2 glasses, one filled with Sprite, the other with Coke. They thanked her and she moved on. Upon takeoff, the land quickly disappeared and pretty soon Cammy couldn't tell the difference between the water and the sky. Her only clue was that one was up, the other down. Cammy and Cody chatted. She told him about her parents' cruise and how her best friend had married and was now living in Hawaii. He told her about his involvement in the family business that he and his cousin were running. So, what brings you to Hawaii for the holidays? She asked.
A family affair.
Oh, she said softly. Obviously, he wasn't prepared to be quite as talkative as Cammy. She smiled and hoped it was friendly enough to set him at ease.
My brother is getting married,
Cody added. Oh, yeah? Cammy asked. Sapphire Bay?
How did you know?
Curiosity furrowed Cody's brow. My friend, Jeannie Wainwright Taylor? Cammy shrugged. Well, nobody does weddings like she does at Sapphire Bay.
So, Sapphire Bay, that's where you'll be staying for the holidays?
He asked. She nodded.
Great,
he said.
I hope we run into each other while we're there.
Seems likely, Cammy said with a shrug and a smile. Cammy and Cody chatted on and off over the remainder of the 5-hour flight, which made it go by faster, she thought. They disembarked at the Honolulu airport a little after 1 o'clock, and Cammy couldn't help thinking she'd really like to take a nap. Cody looked at her as they made their way inside the terminal.
Do you need to go to baggage?
Cammy shook her head. My bags are being delivered to the hotel. You?
Same here. I'm going to arrange for a car to the North Shore, he said. Would you like to share it with me?
I'd love to, she said conditionally. But I think my friend Jeannie will probably be out there waiting for me. Cammy's phone buzzed. She fished it out of her purse and checked the display. A voicemail. She queued it up and listened to the message from Jeannie. In a nutshell, Jeannie, Donnie, and Marla had gone to the Big Island this morning and would be back later in the afternoon. Jeannie had arranged for a car to meet Cammy outside the baggage claim area. After the voicemail ended, Cammy looked at Cody. My friend had something come up, but she sent a car for me. How about you join me?
I gladly accept,
he smiled. In the baggage claim area, Cammy spotted her driver immediately, thanks to the Cammy McClure sign he was holding up. On the drive to the North Shore, Cammy and Cody chatted about nothing too personal while admiring the view. When they arrived at Sapphire Bay, he helped her out of the car and walked her inside. They both checked in, and before Cammy disappeared into the elevator, Cody approached her.
Cammy,
he said with a grin.
Would you like to have dinner with me this evening?
Sure, she nodded. I'd like that very much. Cammy found herself hoping that Jeannie, Donnie, and Marla didn't return until after dinner, so she wouldn't have to make a choice between Jeannie and Cody. Cammy and Cody had made plans to meet at the wishing well at 6:30. When Jeannie hadn't called by 5:30, Cammy was feeling pretty good about not having to make a choice. She'd taken a shower and pretty much wrapped up her hair and makeup before laying out her little black dress that clung to her body in all the right places. Then her phone jingled. Jeannie. Cammy thought about not answering it for a split second, but Jeannie would freak out if she didn't. Cammy accepted the call and put Jeannie on speaker. How's the Big Island? Big, Jeannie laughed. Sorry I couldn't meet you at the airport. It's not a big deal. No worries. I wish we could dine in tonight, but Donnie's family has this thing on the glamorous Jeannie, she said. Meet me in the lobby at 7? Do you mind if I beg off on this one? Cammy asked, trying not to sound overly anxious. Cammy, I don't want to leave you to dine on room service your first evening here, Jeannie said. You'll sit at our table. We'll catch up. Besides, there's someone I want you to meet. Maybe tomorrow? What's up? Jeannie's voice grew suspicious. I sort of have a date. What do you mean, sort of? Well, okay, it's a date. You've been here about 15 minutes. How the hell do you have a date? I met him on the plane, Cammy said with a shrug. Okay, so breakfast first thing in the morning, Jeannie said, then laughed a little as she added, I want to hear all about your date. Okay, I'll see you in the morning, Cammy said, and ended the call. She touched up her makeup and hair, slipped into her dress, and at 6:15, headed downstairs. Christmas music filled the elevator. In the lobby, a large, beautifully decorated tree took center stage. The staff wore red and white Santa hats. Even so, Cammy had to keep reminding herself that it actually was the holiday season. The weather just didn't support it. Still, there was something to be said for spending Christmas in paradise. Cammy traversed the lobby and headed toward the wishing well. She found Cody standing in front of the restaurant. He was dressed in a pair of black slacks and a blue and black Hawaiian shirt. When he saw her, he smiled, and it was devilishly handsome. She felt her face flush as she approached him. Just inside the entry of the wishing well, another Christmas tree twinkled in the dimly lit atmosphere, while Burl Ives beckoned everyone to have a holly jolly Christmas.
Good evening, Cody said. I'm glad you're joining me for dinner. I didn't get you into too much trouble with your friend, did I?
Cammy shook her head. I'll see her for breakfast tomorrow. It's cool.
Wonderful.
Cody laid his hand against the small of her back as they headed inside. She felt a ripple of excitement at his touch. His cologne, an entirely masculine scent, enveloped her with heated thoughts that she shouldn't be thinking, considering she'd only met him today. Cammy and Jeannie had dined at the wishing well when she'd come for Jeannie's wedding last year. She remembered liking the fish. Maybe she'd have that again.
6:30 for Hollis,
Cody said to the hostess. Cammy didn't miss the look that crossed the girl's face when she found his name on the computer screen. For some reason, she thought Cody was special. And so did Cammy. She was thrilled that Cody snuggled her closer as the hostess made eyes at him. They followed her through the restaurant to a table on the deck overlooking the crystal blue waters of the Pacific. A gentle ocean breeze caressed Cammy's arms as Cody pushed her chair in and then claimed the seat across from her. After they ordered drinks, a Mai Tai for Cammy and a beer for Cody, he settled his sights on Cammy with a long, searching look. Even in the dimly lit restaurant, she could see the heat in his blue eyes and became startlingly aware of the attraction between them.
Have you always lived in California?
He asked. Between sips of her cocktail, she said, Yes. With a nod, she added, Born and raised.
So you like living there?
She shrugged. Yeah, she said, hoping she didn't come across as too indifferent. It wasn't that she didn't like Northern California. She did. But the reason she was still there was that the opportunity to leave her hometown had never arisen. And with her sister living on the other side of the world, sticking close to her parents seemed like the thing to do. Secretly, though, Cammy often daydreamed about moving somewhere else. She'd just never had the guts to strike out on her own. Not to that extent, anyway. As if reading her mind, he said,
I've often thought about what it would be like to live somewhere besides Texas.
He hesitated a moment, then added,
It's always been a given, though, that I was expected to take my place in the family business. So, I'm kind of stuck.
You couldn't decide to do something else? Cammy wondered. He thought about it.
I suppose I could have, he said with a shrug. But there are some things you just don't walk away from because you were born into it.
I see, she said. But she really didn't see it all. The thought crossed her mind to wonder what kind of business his family was involved in. Part of her wanted to ask about it, but she didn't want to come off as prying. Well, she raised her cocktail to him. Here's to quiet vacations in Hawaii. He clicked his beer bottle against her glass and grinned. The waitress appeared. Cammy ordered the fish and another Mai Tai, and Cody ordered a steak. By the time dinner was served, Cammy, who wasn't much of a drinker, was feeling the effects of the cocktails. She and Cody ate while chatting about this and that, whatever came to their minds. After dinner, they ordered desserts and another round of cocktails. Cammy knew she should have cut herself off after the first drink, since she wasn't a drinker to begin with, but she was having a hard time handling the way Cody was looking at her. It was like he was invading her soul. Cody glanced at Cammy, studying her intently.
Are you sure you don't have a boyfriend tucked away somewhere?
No. She shook her head, then added with a hint of jest in her voice. If I did, I'd hope he'd want to spend Christmas with me. Cody sucked in a breath.
I know I wouldn't want to let you out of my sight.
He chuckled. Then his expression turned serious.
You are an incredibly beautiful woman, Cammy.
His eyes locked with hers. The intensity of his gaze made Cammy feel like he was undressing her with his eyes. She swallowed hard, unable to pull her gaze away. And you're absolutely sure that you don't have a girlfriend back home waiting for you? She asked, just because he'd questioned her about it.
If I did, Christmas in Hawaii without her?
He laughed.
I doubt she'd be waiting when I got back.
Fair enough, Cammy said.
How long are you staying?
Till after New Year's. You?
Well, I was planning to go back home a couple of days after Christmas, but I can see a definite reason to extend my stay.
He raked a tantalizing gaze over her. You gotta stop that. Cammy felt her cheeks heating up. Thankfully, it was dark in the restaurant. Dark enough, she hoped, that he couldn't see the crimson on her cheeks. He held his gaze firmly upon her.
You want to go for a walk on the beach?
There were plenty of reasons why she shouldn't, but she wouldn't let any of them inside her head. Yeah, she nodded. Or we could just cut to the chase and go on upstairs. Chapter 3. The pounding inside Cammy McClure's head felt like someone with a hammer and chisel was picking away at her skull from the inside. Thank God the morning sun was on the other side of the hotel. She attempted to climb out of bed and made it as far as dangling her legs off the edge. Glancing around the room, she moaned. This wasn't her room at all. It resembled her room, but it wasn't. This room was part of a suite. She could tell by the open door that provided a peek at the suite's living room. Cammy laid her forehead in the palm of her hand. Where the hell am I? She inquired softly.
Cammy?
A familiar masculine voice drifted into the bedroom.
You awake?
Cody? Oh, God. Yeah? Uncertainty clawed at the word as she uttered it. Cammy glanced down at herself. She was still in her dress from last night. Her shoes were on the floor next to the bed. Cammy inched off the bed, grabbed her shoes, and tiptoed out into the living room, where she found Cody standing at the wall of windows with a cup of coffee in his hand. Seeing him standing there, looking so divinely perfect, she stopped in the doorway. Hey. Cody looked over his shoulder and smiled.
Coffee?
Yeah, she said. That'd be great. Cammy sat down on the couch and watched Cody move toward the kitchen counter on the far side of the room. He grabbed a mug and began filling it with coffee. Without looking up, he said,
Sugar? Cream?
She answered, 1 sugar, a splash of cream. He fixed her coffee as she'd requested and brought the mug over, handing it to her. He claimed a seat on the couch, leaving at least a foot of empty space between them.
I take it you don't drink much,
he said, and it was no question. She said with a hint of laughter, No.
Drinking's overrated anyway,
Cody said. Surprisingly, that made her feel better. She chuckled a little, then looked at him. Did we?
No,
he said coolly.
Call me old-fashioned, but I prefer it when a woman can remember our encounter.
Cammy closed her eyes and massaged her forehead with the fingers of her free hand. I'm really sorry about all this, she said, and snuck a peek at him with one eye. Cody reached for her hand, pulling it away from her face.
You have nothing to apologize for,
he said.
I know you want to get together with your friend this morning. Can I see you later?
Cammy's heart did a little flip. Yeah, I'd like that, she said softly.
I have a thing later today, he said. I'd love to have dinner with you again tonight. Is 7 too late? I should be able to sneak away by then.
7's fine, she said, wondering what he was sneaking away from.
Great. I'll give you a call around 5:30 or 6.
After going back to her room, Cammy took a quick shower, dressed in shorts and a sleeveless blouse, and headed downstairs to meet Jeannie at the Beachcomber Cafe for a late breakfast. Cammy found Jeannie standing outside the restaurant's entrance. The girls hugged, then went inside the cafe, where Cammy followed Jeannie to her favorite table overlooking the shoreline outside. Cammy ordered a fruit plate, and Jeannie opted for a cheese omelet. While they waited for their food, they chatted about this and that, how the plane ride from the mainland was, Jeannie's trip to the Big Island, and Donnie's cousin's wedding later today. When the food arrived, Jeannie salted and peppered hers, then glanced at Cammy. So, tell me about this guy you met on the plane. He must really be something. It's not like you to take up with strangers. Cammy snorted a laugh. This guy is arguably the best-looking man I've ever seen. Just thinking about Cody gave Cammy goosebumps. He's kind, considerate, and very much a gentleman. So, what's his name? Jeannie asked eagerly. Where's he from? I'm gonna keep that to myself for now. I just want to see if he calls this evening like he said he would. Cammy looked at Jeannie, hoping her decision didn't offend her friend. If he does, then I'll share all the details with you. She sucked in a breath and shrugged. If he doesn't, then I can forget about him with relative ease, since I'll never hear his name again. Well, it sounded good in theory. Like that's ever gonna happen, Jeannie chuckled. He'll call. For you? They always call, she said with a wink. Says the woman who's married to Mr. Hunky. After they had a good laugh, Jeannie said, "So, when do you want your Christmas present? Today or tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Cammy said without missing a beat. She hadn't wrapped Jeannie's yet. "Tomorrow it is," Jeannie said. "Let's meet for breakfast at the Ocean View and exchange them then. They have a great buffet." "Sounds great." The rest of the day will be pretty hectic for us with Donnie's family in tow. The girls continued chatting long after they'd finished their meal. Jeannie had a magnificent party planned for New Year's Eve and couldn't express enough how happy she was that Cammy would be there. If Cammy was lucky, Cody would opt to stay through the new year. Maybe he'd be her date for the party. Jeannie checked her watch. "I hate to wrap this up so quickly, but Donnie's cousin is getting married this afternoon." She tossed her napkin onto her plate. "Say, would you like to tag along while I tend to some last-minute details?" Cammy shrugged. "Sure." What else was she going to do? Besides wait for Cody's call. She followed Jeannie into the lobby, where she saw Jeannie's husband, Donnie, talking to a guy. He looked familiar, with the same build as Cody, but his back was to Cammy and Jeannie, so Cammy couldn't be sure if it was actually Cody or if she was just starting to see Cody in every man that crossed her path. "Oh, here's Donnie." Jeannie grabbed Cammy's arm. "He'll want to say hello." Donnie smiled when he saw them. "Cammy." He leaned in to kiss her cheek. "I can't tell you how thrilled we are that you're joining us for the holidays. And Jeannie is especially excited." "Thanks," Cammy said. "I couldn't be happier to spend the holidays with my BFF." Donnie glanced at the man standing at his side, drawing Cammy's attention to him. Cody? It was Cody, but he looked straight through Cammy, like he didn't even know her. Somewhere in the distance, she heard Donnie say, "This is my cousin Corey. He's getting married today." Married? Today? Cammy felt every ounce of dignity she'd ever possessed drop to her feet and melt into a puddle on the floor. "Corey?" Donnie continued the introductions. "This is Jeannie's best friend, Cammy McClure." Cammy looked at Cody, or Corey, or whatever his name was, but he simply looked right through her, as if he were meeting her for the first time. "It's nice to meet you, Cammy." Whatever his job was, he'd missed his calling. This guy should have been an actor. "Merry Christmas," he added with that same sly grin that he'd been throwing at her all last night. "Happy holidays," Cammy said, just to cover the chaos going on inside her. That, and she would never let him know she was upset over his lying, cheating ass. It's too bad his soon-to-be bride didn't know what a cad she was marrying. As he turned away, fury churned inside Cammy. Revenge was beginning to rear its spiteful head. She should have called him Cody to his face. That would have fixed him. At the very least, it would have made Donnie and Jeannie question him. But nothing good could come from that. Cammy didn't want to be known as the woman who'd come to Hawaii for the holidays and ended up being the reason a wedding was called off, especially Donnie's cousin's wedding. Besides, it wasn't her job to look out for Corey's soon-to-be wife. Cammy couldn't follow Jeannie around the resort on her last-minute check of the details for what she'd bet was Corey's wedding. No, she couldn't do that. "Hey." She reached for Jeannie's forearm. "I'm feeling a little bit of a headache coming on. I think I'll head up to my room, take some Advil, and lie down for a while." Jeannie nodded. I'll check on you later. Go rest up so you'll be ready when Mr. Gorgeous calls. Yeah, Cammy said with a slight nod. She couldn't broach that subject just yet. Jeannie would know something was up. When Jeannie asked tomorrow, Cammy would simply tell her that Mr. Too Good to Be True had turned out to be just that. He didn't call. In the meantime, she had to go to her room and let this little jab to her heart heal. It shouldn't take long, right? Cammy's phone chimed when she stepped into the elevator. She glanced at the display. Cody. What nerve, she thought as she rejected the call. Later that afternoon, Jeannie called. How are you feeling? She asked. Better, Cammy said. My headache has subsided a bit. Feel like meeting me downstairs? Sure, but aren't you at that wedding for Donnie's cousin? The reception has just started. I can slip away. Okay. Give me 15 minutes to get dressed. Sounds good. Meet me at the Seaside Grill. Will do, Cammy said, and disconnected the call. She slipped into a blue and black spaghetti-strap dress that she'd bought when she'd come for Jeannie's wedding. While she was touching up her hair, her cell chimed again. She checked her watch, thinking it might be Jeannie and that she'd taken too long to get dressed. She glanced at her phone's display. Cody. This guy sure had some balls. Trying to hook up with another woman on his wedding day? What was he going to tell his new bride this evening when he slipped out to meet Cammy? Cammy picked up her phone and accepted the call. With the sternest voice she could muster, she said, Don't call me again. As she moved the phone away from her ear, she could hear him saying something, but she didn't care what he had to say. She disconnected the call. What nerve, she said softly, stepping into the hallway. Inside the elevator, Cammy wrangled control of her emotions. The last thing she wanted to do was cue Jeannie in that something or someone had upset her. She planned to let Jeannie think that she couldn't care less about the guy who'd stood her up. Once downstairs, Cammy plastered on a practiced smile as she walked inside the Seaside Grill. The hostess led her to Jeannie, who was sitting at a table in the back. As Cammy approached the table, Jeannie asked, You want a Mai Tai? Cammy knew it was a bad idea, even as she said, Sure. She shrugged and sat down across from Jeannie. Jeannie looked at the hostess. 2. The centerpiece on the table, white floating candles and varying sizes of red and white ornaments, and the Christmas music filtering through the sound system, reminded Cammy that it was actually Christmas. Something she kept forgetting now that she'd arrived on the island. It seemed too warm to be Christmas. But Cammy wasn't complaining. She could get used to Christmas in paradise. So long as Donnie's asinine cousin wasn't around. So, Jeannie grinned mischievously. Are you gonna tell me about the guy from the plane? Cammy shook her head, wishing they'd bring the drinks already. He didn't call, she shrugged, pretending it was no big deal. Jeannie checked her watch. It's early, only 5:30. She looked at Cammy. He could still call. Cammy shrugged again. I'm over it. She glanced around the restaurant, mainly to hide any telltale signs her face might be giving away. Once she was sure she had regained control of her emotions, she turned back to Jeannie and said, Wasn't there someone you wanted me to meet? Tell you what, Jeannie said. You sleep on it. If you still want to meet him, I'll introduce you tomorrow. Chapter 4. Christmas morning, Cammy was twiddling her thumbs at 5 a.m. She was wide awake, thanks to the huge lag between the California and Hawaii time zones. Cammy's cell chimed. She checked the display. A text message. She keyed it up and her heart sank as she read it. I'm not sure what I did to upset you, but I wanted to wish you a very Merry Christmas. I hope all your dreams come true. Cody. She had to find something to do besides think about Cody Corey, while she waited for the time to pass until it was 8 a.m. Only then could she divert her attention elsewhere. Breakfast with Jeannie. Speaking of breakfast with Jeannie, Cammy should probably wrap her Christmas present, since they were supposed to exchange gifts this morning. Cammy had saved up her money to buy the costly, at least by her standards, 8x10 Barrington picture frame for Jeannie. She skimmed her fingertips over the lightly hammered silver-plated frame. Her fingertips skidded over the delicate beads along the outer border. The black velvet back was especially soft to the touch. It was the perfect frame for Jeannie and Donnie's wedding photo. Cammy hoped she liked it. She concealed the picture frame in gift wrap with an array of silver and blue glittering snowflakes and a gold bow. Cammy took her phone, her wallet, and Jeannie's Christmas present and headed out. When the elevator doors parted, Cammy stepped inside and immediately saw Cody Corey and his new bride, who was hanging all over him. Cammy's eyes met his, and again his gaze shot right through her, like he didn't know her. God, what nerve. Cammy bit back the annoyance and turned to face the elevator doors. Thankfully, the ride to the lobby only took a few seconds. She wasn't sure she could have stood listening to their giggles and coos any longer than that. When the lift came to a stop and the doors parted, Cammy exited the compartment without looking back. At Ocean View's breakfast buffet, Cammy found Jeannie waiting for her at a table on the terrace. A shoebox-sized present wrapped in red foil paper and adorned with a bright green bow sat off to one side on Jeannie's table. Cammy placed her present for Jeannie on the table, and after a greeting befitting best friends, both girls headed to the buffet. After filling their plates and grabbing glasses of juice, they returned to the table. So, Jeannie said, did he call last night? Cammy shook her head. But it's okay. I'm determined to have nothing but fun for the rest of the year. She chuckled a bit before turning her attention to the food on her plate. Once they'd eaten, Jeannie picked up the red foil package and offered it to Cammy. Merry Christmas. I'm so glad you're here. Cammy took the gift and deposited it in her lap, then reached for Jeannie's present, offering it to her. Merry Christmas to you too. And I'm glad I'm here. She laughed. Then Jeannie laughed. Open yours first, Cammy said. Whatever Jeannie had gotten Cammy, it was sure to be far superior in price than the gift Cammy had spent months saving up for to buy Jeannie. With that in mind, Cammy didn't want her gift for Jeannie to follow in its wake. It was no secret that Jeannie had access to way more money than Cammy, but Cammy didn't begrudge her that. She also didn't want her gift to fall flat by making its appearance after Jeannie's. Cammy watched Jeannie gingerly pop off the tape from the snowflaked wrapping paper. She hoped Jeannie liked the picture frame. It would feel good to see it displaying Jeannie and Donnie's wedding photo. Jeannie lifted the lid off the box and pushed aside the interior paper. Oh my God, Jeannie exclaimed. This is beautiful, Cammy. Jeannie glanced up at her. You shouldn't have. And Cammy understood why she said it. Jeannie knew Cammy's budget could hardly afford such luxuries. But since you did, I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. Yeah? This was made for my favorite wedding picture. Jeannie put the frame back in the box and set it on the table, then leaned toward Cammy and hugged her. Thank you. It's beautiful. And I know how much you had to give up to get this for me. Not really, Cammy said, hugging her back. It took a few weeks, but I saved up for it. Jeannie pulled away from Cammy. Now, she said giddily, open yours. Cammy followed Jeannie's lead and gently popped off the tape at both ends. Her heart pounded when she saw the Jimmy Choo box. Don't get excited, Jeannie chuckled. I put your present in an old shoebox. Cammy glanced up at Jeannie. Would she do that? Warily, she lifted the lid. The Jimmy Choo crystal-covered suede heels with crisscross ankle straps made Cammy swoon. Oh my God! Cammy picked up one of the shoes. My heart just fell straight into my lap. These are freaking awesome! She threw her arms around Jeannie. Jeannie looked at Cammy. Just like that picture frame was made for my wedding picture, those shoes were made for your feet. You're the best friend ever. Right back at ya, Jeannie said. Now that I've got you in a good mood, let's go up to the penthouse. Donnie's waiting for us. He's been plotting some sort of surprise. Jeannie rolled her eyes. Are you sure you want me tagging along then? Cammy asked. I don't want to get in the way. No, Jeannie shook her head. It's for us. Oh. Cammy was intrigued and a bit confused. Why was Donnie surprising them? Let's go. With her present in one hand, Jeannie reached for Cammy's hand and helped her to her feet. Ooh, Cammy said, following Jeannie out of the restaurant. I'm going to wear my shoes New Year's Eve. You will dazzle all the men, Jeannie laughed. That's the idea, right? On the way up to the penthouse, Cammy and Jeannie laughed and chatted. It was a good day, and Cammy barely remembered that Cody... She had to stop thinking of him as Cody. Cody wasn't real. Nevertheless, whoever he was, he had practically stolen Cammy's heart with one glance, and then he'd gone on to stomp all over it. She was so glad she hadn't revealed to Jeannie that her mystery guy was actually Donnie's cousin, who, by the way, had gotten married yesterday. She didn't have to feel awkward or embarrassed around Donnie and his family. Jeannie opened the door to the penthouse and Cammy followed her inside, where Donnie was chatting with another man. Cody? No, not Cody. Corey. Oh, great. Corey and his wife were here. This was not going to be fun at all. Donnie said, It's about time. We thought we were going to have to send out a search party for you two. Corey's eyes met Cammy's and lit up as he smiled brightly. Finally, he looked at her like he knew who she was, and not only that, he was glad to see her. He went to her side. I'm glad you're here, he said, and kissed her cheek. Are you crazy? She asked under her breath. Instantly, Donnie was at their side. Cammy, this is my cousin, Cody. Cody? Cammy felt her heart falling and she couldn't manage to catch it. Pointing at Cody, she asked weakly, He's not the groom? Donnie and Cody laughed. No, Donnie said. That was his twin brother, Corey. Then it hit Donnie. But I can see why you'd think that, since I just introduced you to Corey yesterday morning. Cammy felt the pain of embarrassment swelling in her head. The words, "Oh, God," shuddered through her. She dropped the Jimmy Choo box. "I'm such an idiot," she said softly, and ran for the door. "Cammy?" Jeannie called after her. But it didn't stop Cammy. She had to get out of there. She would never, ever live this down. Cammy raced to the elevator and pushed the button anxiously. There was no telling how many members of Donnie's family, Cody's family, were in Marla's penthouse, Donnie's mother, next door. Cammy needed to get out, and fast. She pushed the button again. "Cammy," Cody said from behind her, gently moving her hand away from the button. "Would you just stop and talk to me?" The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside. She glanced at the number panel and, without looking at Cody, she said, "I think we're way beyond that. What's left to say?" She finally looked at him and shrugged. "I'm an idiot. I don't need you to tell me that." Cammy pressed the button for her floor and stepped to the back of the compartment. Cody slipped inside just as the doors closed. "There's a lot left to say." He followed her gaze until he met it and caught it. "Number one, I should have told you I had a twin brother who also happened to be the groom. Once you get to know us, you'll be able to tell us apart. But at this point," he shook his head, "I don't blame you for mistaking him for me." And did he have to be so magnanimous? Couldn't he just accept that he dodged a bullet and let her walk away gracefully? Did he have to take every ounce of her dignity with him? If nothing else, she did owe him an apology. "I'm very sorry for the way I treated you. You didn't deserve it." "Well, I know now not to ever make you mad," he said with a bit of a grin. "I'm sure, to your delight, after the holidays, we'll never have to see each other again." "That would be a travesty." Cammy shook her head. "Don't you think that too much water has already flowed under the bridge?" "There's not enough water for that bridge," Cody said surely. "Besides, your best friend has already said you're perfect for me." Cody grinned, enclosing Cammy in the corner. "I have to say, I agree with her." "Yeah, until I do something stupid again." She tried to laugh at herself, even though it was hard. "We both made a mistake," he said. "Are you going to deny your heart's desire because of it?" He stepped closer, his lips nearly touching hers. The scent of him, woodsy and masculine, engulfed her as he said, "I know I'm not." And then he kissed her, long and hard and deep, chasing out every ounce of doubt she'd conjured up. Epilogue. Christmas Day, 1 year later. Cammy and Cody were the center of attention at Sapphire Bay's party terrace, as they should be, since they were the bride and groom. Cammy felt like a princess in her Oscar de la Renta Chantilly lace strapless gown. Cody whispered against her ear, "Are you sure that Niagara Falls is where you want to spend our honeymoon?" Cammy nodded. "That's where my grandparents spent their honeymoon." She smiled. "My grandma said it was the most romantic place she'd ever been." "It's awfully cold there right now." Cammy shrugged. "We'll stay inside." Cody picked up his glass and raised it to her. "I'm glad I reserved a suite with a fireplace." He winked. My kind of guy. Cammy giggled. When do we leave? Tomorrow, Cody said. I have a surprise for you, though. Yeah? Want to see it? He asked. When she nodded, he added, It's upstairs. Cammy gazed out at their guests. Cody's family, her family, their friends. Should we? They won't mind. She looked at him warily. She longed to be alone with him, and she desperately wanted to know what his surprise was. Cody grinned mischievously, stood, and held out his hand. Cammy took it, letting him pull her to her feet. As they slipped inside the hotel lobby, Jeannie gave them a knowing nod, and Cammy realized that her best friend was in on whatever Cody was up to. Inside the elevator, Cody wrapped his arm around Cammy's waist and pressed the button for the top-level penthouses. That was confusing for Cammy. There were only 2 penthouses on the top level, Jeannie and Donnie's, and Marla's. She glanced at Cody quizzically as the elevator doors opened. He nudged her out into the hallway. What are we doing up here? She asked. You'll see, he said evasively, stopping in front of Marla's door and slipping a key from his pocket. What are we going into Marla's penthouse for? She asked as he opened the door. With a grand gesture, he fanned his hand out in front of them and smiled. Take a look inside. Cammy peeked inside. The entire penthouse had been redecorated, and in the exact fashion that appealed to Cammy. Clearly, Jeannie had been involved. What? She asked, still unsure about what was happening. Marla has graciously relocated to the penthouse below, he said. This one is yours. For tonight? Cody chuckled. Forever. I bought it for you. You bought it for me? He nodded. Now you can come see Jeannie anytime you want, and you have your very own apartment right next door. I hope you'll be here too, Cammy said. You can count on that. Cody leaned down and kissed her. Wherever you are, his words breezed against her lips, is where I'll be. That sounds like paradise to me. Cammy wrapped her arms around his neck and laid her lips against his, with a kiss that sent the pit of her stomach into a swirl. How lucky could one girl get? This has been Christmas Bride, a short story. Sapphire Bay Romance, Book 2. Written by Sandra Edwards. Narrated by Heather Masters. Copyright 2014 by Sandra Edwards. Production copyright 2015 by Sandra Edwards.